Welcome back to Bleav In Rams. I'm Joe DeLeone here with my co-host Ryan Roberts. We're filling in today on Bleav In Rams again. You heard us twice so far here on Bally Sports West, where we did our mock draft. We also did our draft preview, and we are in the thick of free agency happening right now. The Rams were pretty aggressive in spending some money in order to shore up their offensive line and really bolster the group. We're going to break down some of those top signings for the Rams and then wrap things up with our thoughts on how we think that this is going to impact the draft implications on who they could take in the first round. Ryan, I want to start off talking about Kevin Dotson, who was the really strong interior offensive lineman that they added at the beginning of this season, that they're going to be bringing back for a deal worth 3 years and $48 million. That is significant money that they're investing in their offensive line. Guards were getting paid a ton, and we're going to talk about another guard in a second, but your thoughts on bringing back Dotson, why it was necessary to spend this kind of money on an interior offensive lineman?
Well, I mean, the Rams were in threats of losing two of their starting interior offensive linemen from this past year. Obviously, Coleman Shelton out there not going to return for the Rams, and then Kevin Dotson, who was a miraculous story. I mean, it really was. I mean, he was a part starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers over the last couple years, and he was pretty good early on in his tenure with the Steelers. Then he kind of tailed off in the ends, and I feel like they just kind of didn't utilize him the best. And he comes to the Rams in his 1 year, Joe, and he's one of the highest graded offensive linemen in the NFL, especially at
Mm,
offensive guard, right? So he definitely earned the contracts. Now, I will say this though. So the readiness of being able to bring back one of your starting interior offensive linemen for a spot that potentially could have been a little bit thin heading into April to the 2024 NFL draft, I think that's very good. That continuity, obviously, a player played well. You want to reward him for playing well. This is a little bit of a there's a little bit of risk here, though, just a slight risk,
yeah.
because one side is if he continues the trajectory that he was on in year one, then you have one of the best guards locked up for 3 years, right, in the NFL. That's great. But the other side of it is that he is a little bit of a 1 year wonder. Was he a solid player at times with Pittsburgh? Yes. But was he consistent? Absolutely not. And yes, had one great year with the Rams, but are you sure that that can be sustained? How good he was in 2023, or was that a little bit of a outlier season? So I like it personally as a Rams fan. I do like retaining Kevin Dotson because I believe that if a player puts in the work and is really good for you, creating that sustainability is a great thing. So he played great in 2023. Hopefully he continues that trend. If he does, then the market's going to reset itself. I mean, the cap is going to go way up next year for next year's offseason. So, yeah, 16 mil per year might look like a really strong number now, but next year the cap's going to keep going up. The market's going to continue to get, re-upped and to getting taken to a higher level. So I like the move for Kevin Dotson. Is it a little bit of a, I don't want to say boomer bust, but is there a little bit of still bust potential with it? To a degree, but I do like the ability to bring him back because he played great for the Rams in 2023.
Yeah, that's where I sit in reacting to this. And you're much more close to home with evaluating the Rams signings and the way that the roster played because you follow the Rams, you're a Rams fan. But just from like an outsider's perspective, what you're bringing up, I remember before the season, the version of Kevin Dotson that was really inconsistent with the Steelers. Now you
Yep.
get a really good season and he deserved and earned the right to get a 3 year deal worth the money that he's getting.
Yep.
But at the same time, there's a lot more inconsistency in his career and on tape than there is the version that we got of him in 2023. One would hope as a younger-ish player, this isn't a guy in his early to mid 30s, a younger player that's getting his second contract, that he would continue to improve and get better, and that this is the better
Right.
situation for him to improve, that the coaching staff is built a good environment for him to become a more confident and stronger offensive lineman for the team. But as you're saying here, there should just be like a sliver of not doubt, but
Yeah.
cautiousness of saying, okay, he hasn't been always the most consistent guard. We should be a little careful of if there is a period in
Right.
time where maybe at the end of the contract or in his second year, or maybe even this upcoming year, where that version of him on the Pittsburgh Steelers returns. This happens all the time. This happens all the time where
Yep.
guys play out of their mind after they got traded, or they play really, really good when that contract is coming up. And then eventually after they resign, not saying that everyone's going to be complacent, but sometimes that version that we got when they were fighting for the contract doesn't always show up on the field.
And I would say this is that things are going to change a little bit for the Rams just moving forward here, right? Like there's going to be some constants, but the constants that are going to be coming back, I think of like Matthew Stafford, for instance, right, as a constant. Matthew Stafford is going to be a year older, right? Maybe a little less mobile than what he was in 2023 and forward, right? Like, I mean, we've seen him. Well, if you remember him on the Detroit Lions, he has never been a runner, but he's always been an extender. He's always been a guy that can really work well in the pocket and can maneuver and can make things happen a little bit outside of structure. A year older, the pocket's going to get a little bit more stagnant, right? But then also, you have to also put into consideration that the center next to him is going to be a different player in 2024, right? It's going to be a little bit different. Yes, you're still going to have Rob Havenstein. You're still going to have Alaric Jackson. You're still going to have Steve Avila, although it seems that Steve Avila is going to be moving inside the center. But regardless,
Yeah.
you're going to have a different player next to you than what you had in 2023. So again, all those things are just what Les Snead and Sean McVay and this coaching staff have to consider when investing this type of money in players. You would think that it would be able to be sustained because he's going to be in the same situation, the same environment, and heck, Kevin Dotson did have a little bit of struggles at points with his Pittsburgh Steelers career. So you would hope that his eyes would be forward, his head would be down, and he would consistently do what he did in 2023 to be able to be one of the best guards in the NFL. So overall, I really like the move. Is there some cautiousness? Yes. Is there some things to consider when giving him a 16 mil per year annual contract? Absolutely. But regardless, the Rams are equipped to being a better offensive line in 2024 with a couple moves that we're going to talk about obviously here in a second. But it starts with Kevin Dotson, who was he was your best offensive lineman in
Yeah.
2023. There was no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of like the key way to kind of wrap this thought up is you're probably still going to get that good version of him. And he's a tremendous player. The way that he made that massive improvement was the second highest rated guard by PFF last year. So that's massive. They also went and spent money on Lions guard Jonah Jackson, who they're giving
Speaking of
3 years.
massive, am I right? Yeah.
Enormous human being, the former Ohio State guard, 3 years, $51 million. Kind of funny that they're giving more money to an outsider than they are to Kevin Dotson. That part is what it is. I like this though, because we talked a lot about, and we're going to discuss the draft implications on this in a bit. The fact that they went and spent the money on a guard without wanting to enter the draft and just hoping whoever they pick is going to be good enough and play at high enough of a level. You mentioned Steve
Yep.
Avila is probably going to bump inside to center, who,
Yep.
when I graded him as a prospect, I liked him as a center. I think he's a better guard. So it's a bit of an
Agreed.
interesting decision to go in that direction. But Jonah
Sure.
Jackson, man, this is a really nice move on their part to go and get a veteran player that was very important for the Lions' run game success. And we know how important for both of these teams. Lions ran the ball like crazy, and the Rams also run the ball very aggressively and effectively. So you're putting together a pretty nice offensive line unit when we were thinking that coming into free agency and coming into the draft, that was going to be one of their biggest weaknesses.
Joe, I'm a little disappointed in you, man, to be honest. I'm a little
Why?
disappointed because you didn't mention that Jonah Jackson was a multi-year starter at Rutgers before he went to Ohio State for the year,
I
okay?
you're right. I am disappointed in myself.
Very disappointed.
I'm an
As
ass
a
for not
true
knowing
as a
that.
true New Jersey guy, I'm very disappointed
You
in
don't
that
claim
recollection.
Rutgers. You claim
I'm
Temple. You
closer to
don't claim
Rutgers than where
Rutgers.
you I'm closer to Rutgers than you are.
That's not true. From where
I'm
I was from
45
in New
minutes.
Jersey,
How far are you? How far are you from Rutgers?
30 minutes. I was 30 minutes from
Lies. I don't
Rutgers.
wanna hear it.
No,
I don't wanna
stop.
hear it. Okay,
Stop.
anyway, I saw a post on Twitter of someone that talked about having a 3 interior offensive linemen not rotation, but starting 3 of Steve Avila at center, and then the 2 guards of Kevin Dotson and now Jonah Jackson coming in, and it was an average of 322 pounds, Joe. Obviously, the Rams have said, "We want to get stout and physical inside," for 2 implications, and this is a big part of why you bring Jonah Jackson in. 1, I think we are seeing guards and interior players in general, offensive line-wise, start to get a little bit more, not recognition is not the right word, but a little bit more valued in today's game, because I think that when you talk to those quarterbacks, the interior pressure is what really bothers them. It's not so much the outside pressure, right? So we're actually seeing the Rams invest heavily in the interior offensive line, which I like from a pass protection perspective. Because again, Matt Stafford, year older, had the injury 2 years ago. So is he going? And I know it was a upper body injury or whatever, but he's still a player that's going into his later 30s now, and he's going to be a player that is going to need a little bit more of a sound pocket, a little bit more physicality, a little bit more girth up front. I think will help him to be able to transition into the later stages of his career and be still a very effective quarterback that we saw in 2023. So I like it there. And then I also like you saw the return of the ability to really run the football in 2023. You saw it.
Mm.
Kyron Williams had his breakout season in year 2. The year before, the Rams struggled to consistently run the football, and when the Rams were at their best a few years ago, especially early on in the Sean McVay tenure, it was about establishing the line of scrimmage and a lot of things working off of it. The play action game, the crossers, the concepts that are going to work off of the heavy outside zone, and then also they have transitioned to a little bit more of a inside run oriented scheme. Those things I think are really going to benefit Kyron Williams in 2024, benefit this run game. Jonah Jackson, who I didn't think was quite as good in 2023 than he was previously, but he was still a very good player for the Detroit Lions, and he brings a level of physicality that both Kevin Dotson and Steve Avila have inside. So I love adding that mass, that physicality. Is 3 years, 51 a big contract for a guard? Absolutely. But when you're talking about bolstering your interior offensive line for a quarterback that's getting less and less mobile and a young running back that is really bursting onto the scene, I think the investment makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we that's the big thing here is that we understand like what the goal is, what the intent is for the direction of building this roster is that focus on trying to make sure that this run game is going to be the priority. Now they went in signed a bit of a weird decision here to bring in Colby Parkinson. And for the it's not weird because they're bringing him in. It's more weird for how much money they're spending on him. Now they're giving him a 3-year, $22.5 million
Yep.
contract, which isn't like crazy. That's not like we're offering him top tight end money, but
Sure.
feels like a good amount to be giving to a tight end who last year had 247 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns on 25 receptions. This
As a
isn't.
part of a rotation, though, a little context, as a part of a
Yeah,
rotation in Seattle, as a part of a
I,
rotation.
I I'm just bringing this up. This one
Yep.
is a tiny bit of a head scratcher because it just seems like too much money and too much long-term security to be giving to a tight end that I guess probably won't even be the starter on this team, right?
I mean, that's still up in the air. I mean, obviously, the Rams are in a little bit of a transitional period at tight end
Yeah.
because obviously the late season injury to Tyler Higbee and his long term future. I don't even is he even under contract after
Well,
this
that's
offseason?
why
I'm
I'm
not even sure
saying
about
that because
that
like I
one.
don't know
Yeah.
the absolute certainty on
Well,
his
he got
contract.
messed up by the who's the Detroit safety that is continues to kill everyone's ACL and
Chauncey
Achilles
Gardner
and
Johnson.
no, the kid that came out of Kirby Joseph that came out of
Oh,
Illinois a couple
oh,
years ago. He's the one that kept chopping down tight ends at the end of the year. But Tyler Higbee goes down. You don't really have an answer outside of Tyler Higbee, right? And haven't had an answer outside of Tyler Higbee. I mean, they had the kid that played at Purdue a couple years ago, whose name's escaping me. That was a little bit more of the Bryson Hopkins was a little bit more of the movement based tight end, but he never really caught traction with the Rams. They used to have Johnny Munt, who was a very solid tight end too for them, but he's no longer obviously in the room. And so the answers in that room are just there's not many of them right now, Joe. I mean, I would say for me that the signing of Colby Parkinson to the contract he got, I would say that Colby's going to get a chance to play a lot of snaps in 2024, and he's going to get an opportunity to be a part of a rotation. Now, I still think, and we'll talk about the draft implications to that. I still think the Rams are going to be in the tight end conversation in the draft to bring in another guy to play with Colby to hopefully be at least a part of a good 2-man rotation. But if Colby Parkinson ends up being your second tight end in some 12 personnel looks, I'm good with that, man, because he is a bigger body tight end that presents some mismatch ability with his length and his ability to win above the rim. He's also a serviceable enough blocker that he could be a tight end too in a 12 personnel set. So I think that because I remember him coming out of Stanford, I actually like Colby
yeah.
Parkinson a decent bit. Like he never caught the traction of being the tight end one in Seattle with guys like Will Disley and Noah Fant over the last couple years, right? But he still showed potential. And I think the Rams are kind of banking on potential a little bit here and a little bit of upside because he still is a younger player. Like we're not talking about a guy that's in his 30s right now. He's still a guy that's just going into his second contract. So I think they're banking on upside of Colby Parkinson. I think that at worst, he's a valuable asset to some two tight end sets in 2024. But I do think he's going to get an opportunity to tend for that starting job, no matter who else is in that room with him.
I just don't love the idea of spending free agent money on tight ends in general unless it's a proven commodity. And I know that like the first one that comes to mind is like Austin Hooper, how aggressively he was sought after, and he didn't really totally pan out as much as I think we would have hoped. But I just feel like when you're going to spend that money on a tight end, you would like to know that this is somebody who could be productive. If you're
Sure.
looking for an injection of youth in the position group, I would turn to the draft. Now, is this a thought of we don't really trust the tight end class this year? I would argue that there's some options on day two that are comparable to Colby Parkinson. I mean, Cade Stover is not a horrible, as bad of an
Right.
athlete as we thought because he tested pretty well. And I think that they could play similar roles because Cade Stover's
Sure.
a good blocker and he showed some pretty good hands. He's just not really going to separate. So I just don't like the strategy. I'm always a draft first person. I just don't
Right.
like spending this much money annually on a tight end of all positions.
I get the hesitation there. And when it first happened, I was like, oh, it's a hefty contract for Colby Parkinson. Like full transparency, that was. But Joe, my counter to that would be I'm a build through the draft guy as well. But one of the positions that rarely ever is a year one huge upside and year one
That's true.
production is tight ends. I mean, so like let's say hypothetically, you're right. And you say, no, we're not going to give a contract to Colby Parkinson. We're going to go to the draft. We're going to take Kate Stover or Theo Johnson or some one of these day two tight ends, right? Or even maybe if you wait to the fourth and go like, all right, we're going to take a swing on a Jared Wiley out of TCU, for instance, right? Like we'll do somebody like that. Are they going to give you year one impact enough where it's like, because my thing is that if you go that route, you don't have options in the room anymore, right? Where it's like if they're not
Yeah.
ready, that you don't have a secondary option. I think in this case scenario, like, is it a slight overpay for what Colby Parkinson is right now? Yes, I would say that that is very fair. Could Colby Parkinson improve though? I think that's very much on the table. And I think that if you do go in the draft, then you're going to spend a lower number on a rookie tight end compared with a 7 point whatever $1 million deal annually that Colby Parkinson got. You're still not putting a ton of money invested in that tight end room when you really think about it in its entirety. So I'm okay with the Rams going this route. It's a little bit of a, I won't say, well, I'll say it. It's a little bit of a boomer bust because I still do think that there's some potential in Colby Parkinson. I still think there's some
Okay.
upside in Colby Parkinson, but you are gambling a little bit on him because he's definitely not a near finished product. Could he be better than what he was in Seattle? Absolutely. Do I still think the Rams need to go into the draft and find another solid option to go with Colby Parkinson? Also true, right? Both things can be true, and I think they are in this situation.
Speaking on draft implications here on what some of these moves are, how they're going to impact the first round draft expectations and what they're going to be looking at. When we
Yep.
did this show a couple of times, and then like when we've done mock drafts, it has felt like a foregone conclusion that they were going to draft a guy like Troy Fotanu as a guard
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
has tackle potential. Maybe they
Yep.
would go and sign a tackle. They did tender Ulrich Jackson, so I feel a little bit
Right.
better about their situation at tackle as well. I
Yeah.
feel like so quickly our expectations of them making moves at the offensive line, I feel like that's pretty aggressively dwindled. I think the one thing that stands out to me the most is that there hasn't been an investment in looking for edge rushers. And I think that now the big position of need that's going to be focused on, and the one that I'm going to keep circling until draft time comes around, is them looking at guys like Jared Verse, Dallas Turner,
Yeah.
Lietu Latu, Demarcus Robinson. Those feel like now more in play than I would have
Darius
considered them.
Robinson. Darius.
Darius Robinson.
You let the
Um,
wide receiver get into your head a little bit there,
well,
man, from
because I
that
have him,
perspective.
I have him written down
Right.
for the list of the players that they signed. But it
Yep.
feels like a lot of those guys now are on the table because the
Mhm.
offensive line's been figured out, and they'd much rather not have as much money invested at edge rusher.
Right. Well, I would say that, we had talked about offensive line a ton when we were doing a little bit of a just kind of early look at the draft with the Rams in their implications. And I would say that getting the two guards to have their place now with, bringing back Kevin Dotson, getting Jonah Jackson, obviously your interior is solidified. You still have Rob Havenstein at right tackle, who's a very good right tackle in the NFL. And then the tendering of Alaric Jackson, obviously there is some want to get Alaric Jackson back because although I still not sure Larry Jackson's a long-term plus starter in the NFL, but he did play pretty well in 2023. Like, we have to give him that credit. He played pretty well. Now, I will say this, if there's a dude on the table at 19, like let's say for some reason, Marius Mims or Olufashanu or someone like that falls to 19 for whatever reason, medical or whatever, would I still consider it? Yes, I personally would. I would still at least have it on the table of like, hey man, Alaric played well last year. We're happy he's a part of the team, but he doesn't present as much upside as an Olufashanu, for instance,
That's
right?
a
So
good
maybe I
point.
would still go that way. But I will say the two most likely spots, and you mentioned one of them, edge, absolutely. If there is a Leatu Latu or a Jared Verse that is staring you at the face. Leatu Latu is a guy that I keep mocking to the Rams because I think it just makes so much sense. Obviously, he's out in LA as well already at UCLA, but that's just kind of a little fun side piece, right? But you have a bunch of pass rushers in that middle of the first round that could be in that conversation at number 19. The other spot, though, I know they re-signed Darius or they signed Darius Williams after he, left to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars for 2 years, but he's a guy that the Rams are very familiar with. And in a zone-based scheme, Darius Williams was very productive with the Rams for a couple years. Like, he was a pretty good player. I think that he'll be a solid addition to the Rams secondary, but they still need cornerback help. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Ahkello Witherspoon out the door, right? You still have some younger guys in the building like Darian Kendrick and Jacoby Durant, like who have some potential. But for the most part, you still need to find a guy. So if there is a player like a Nate Wiggins or a Cooper DeJean or someone like that that is staring me at the face, cornerback is another spot outside of edge rusher that I would have a lot of interest in if I was the LA Rams.
Yeah, that's the other position group that like really I was going to bring up and that stood out to me of they have that option to go edge in the first round or they could go corner. I would almost argue that because of how quickly that top group of edge rushers disappears off the board and how deep this corner class, where for the way and the style that they play defense, I know that there's a possible identity change here with a new defensive coordinator coming in, but
Right.
you could wait until day 2 to get a Cam Hart or a TJ Tampa, somebody that's a little more zone-esque that would fit that scheme. But I feel like that has to be, those are the two positions that make the most sense. Nothing else really to me like really stands out glaringly that needs to be addressed on
Not
day
that
1
early.
or day 2 because everything else has been pretty much figured out in free agency. And we already feel
Right.
pretty good about the receiver room, the running back room. We know who their
Yeah.
quarterback is. It's just a couple missing pieces here on defense.
Yeah, I would agree because I think, wide receiver, could you add someone on day 3 to continue to bolster depth? For
Yeah.
sure. Linebacker room, like if there's a guy in the 3rd or 4th round that I like to be accompanied, an Ernest Jones inside, if it's an upgrade over Christian Roseboom, RIP to South Dakota State legend Christian Roseboom, maybe, I don't know. But it might be on the table. But ultimately, I would say if you ask me today, what are the two biggest pressing needs for the Rams? It would be edge and corner. And like Joe, my ideal scenario, because again, Rams fan, right?
Mm.
So my ideal world is Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo is there at
Ooh,
19. Because if he's there at 19, I don't even have to think about it, man. Because
running the
well,
podium.
I would run to the podium because although I really like Layatu Latu for what he is, a super nuanced pass rusher. I think Quinyon's a special football player. The only player that would make me second guess it is if like a Jared Verse was there at 19 for whatever reason. I ultimately don't think that's going to happen, so I don't think it's going to matter as much. Quinyon Mitchell first round, maybe you get the best pass rusher that you can, with your first pick on day 2. I think that those are obviously the two most pressing needs for the
Mm.
LA Rams though going into the rest of this offseason.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.